The Journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. So, Delinda, Grindle, welcome to The Journey. Mm-hmm. And so let me just first explain a little bit about what The Journey is. And The Journey is a show that is basically about transformation, about the idea of how do we fail forward, how do we recreate ourselves when we have obstacles in our life, what do we do with those, and then how do we move through those, how there's opportunity within the obstacle. So welcome, and obviously we've known each other for a long time, so let's see. Diane and I have been together since '92, so we've known each other since then. Yeah. So, but if just for the listeners, if you were going to describe what do you do for fun, what does Delinda do for fun?
Delinda loves to garden outside.
Yeah.
I've been an avid gardener for probably when we bought our home, Rob and I bought our home, so probably 35 years. Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot of landscaping work outside. I enjoy being outside in nature because I feel that it brings me the closest to my God, and I find peace and calmness in that, and any worries or concerns or just even things that I've had to deal with at work become just kind of rest inside me, and I can let all that go when I'm out in nature. And I love to hike and be on walks, and again, just out listening to creation, and it calms my soul, feeds my soul. Sure.
And tell the audience a little bit about, that's what you do for fun, and that's obviously also talks about the spiritual part of who you are, but then tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do, who you are as a person, what do you do?
Who I am as a person? Okay, well, I'm a grief counselor by profession. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in grief work for probably 15 years, about that. I think that God has always directed. When I look back, 25 years ago when the journey started, I've been able to see how God's worked through that and where He's led me today. I hope that I use the skills that He's gifted me with, that I feel He's gifted me with, that compassion to walk alongside and companion people in loss. And loss doesn't mean just death either. Loss can be caregivers of clients with terminal illnesses. They could be the clients themselves with the illness. Any life transition.
Right. Which kind of is what we're seeing happening right now, right? I mean, we're seeing a lot of grief just over our daily lives have been changed, and people struggling with some people not being able to have a job right now. They're unemployed, either furloughed or just not able to go to school, or if they are able to work, they're working in an alternated type schedule, alternative type schedule, and so there is a lot of change where in that change that may be perceived as a loss, right? But before we kind of jump into today, so why don't you tell us the story about how you got into grief work, and I know that's a pretty powerful story. So,
so I'm married to Rob Grindle. We've been together since we were 17, and about 23 years ago, on December 23rd, our niece on his side, so it would be his sister Sue's daughter, they were dairy farmers in Davis, and they were out milking their cows, and their farmhouse caught on fire. And they went in they had two children, Casey and Roxanne, and they tried to save their children, but they were unable to. So both of their children, Casey actually was brought out by a fireman, but had passed away due to smoke inhalation, and Roxanne did not come out of the home. So Ricky and Rod lost both of their children that Christmas. It was my very first experience on death, and I would say traumatic death, with the loss of two children. And so, in the Grindle family, and I grew up in a very faith-based families, so that was, in that journey too. But I also saw an extended family struggle, and I also struggled myself at that time trying to understand, why this happened. And the interesting thing was, when Rob and I received the call, we were out eating dinner with some good friends of ours from church, and Linda's always been a good friend of mine and helped walk me kind of through my grief process too. And one time I remember having lunch with her, and I said, I just don't understand how God could allow this to happen. And he said, well, why not? Because, and not that God allowed it to happen, but, why was it happening to us and our family? And she says, well, why not? Because what makes you any different than anyone else that goes through tragedy? And that just really struck me and hit home with me. So then at that point, I don't even remember how I got introduced to Dr. Wolfelt, who runs the Center for Loss and Life Transition out in Colorado, Fort Collins. But at that point, I decided, well, I think I'm going to go out and take one of his classes. So one of his classes lasts a week out there, and you pay for it, and you pay for your stay. And you can work towards a certificate in grief and death studies. So I thought, well, I'm going to go out and I need to just understand my own grief at that point. So I went with another friend from church for the first time out there. And it was just transforming for me. His center is in the foothills, and so as he taught us, and I apologize, I can't remember the exact class because it's been so long ago, but as he was teaching, then we would have moments of contemplation and times to sit out and just really look at ourselves and how the losses that we've experienced have changed us. Because when someone passes away in your life is changed forever, because it won't ever be the same.
Right.
And then just how are you going to walk through this grief, and how are you going to heal from this loss? And so that was when my journey began many years ago. And so at that time with Dr. Wolfelt, because the program hadn't become real popular at the time, so then we were allowed to go back class after class, so I could get certified within 2 years. It might have even been a year and a half. Now I don't think you can do that. It takes more time to get certified. So that was the beginning of the journey, and then since then I've had real significant losses throughout my life. More recently, my dad, and that was a real struggle for me with my dad. So, and how do I grieve that loss and still be a grief counselor to others and be supportive for them? But I think as I look at that journey, I think my clients helped me, to be honest with you. They were a blessing to me in that journey too. And so but also a part of my journey, since I got certified and got my licensed clinical social worker degree and licensing in 2010, Tom Fitzgerald's at Fitzgerald's Funeral Home knew that I studied under Dr. Wolfelt and wanted to know if I would be open to starting an aftercare program for Fitzgerald's Funeral Home here in Rockford. And I was actually kind of caught off guard. And so I said, sure. And I didn't know what this program was going to look like because I had to make it from ground floor up with another worker there, Brenda, at the time. And so we spent a year writing the program. And part of the program is doing mailings throughout the year to support the family at specific interval times. The other time is to provide grief support services for the families for a year after the funeral. So we wrote the program in 2010 and launched it in 2011. And so I work part-time there and I'm a director of that program, and then provide the support services to families there. So that has been just tremendous for me too, because it's a little bit different than working here at KP Counseling in a clinical setting, so very two different. And then another door opened, and I do some volunteer grief counseling for the Haven Network here in Rockford, Illinois, which is a beautiful non-for-profit organization that supports families who lose babies and children. And so I've been doing that, I think, 4 years now with them, 4 or 5, and I sit on the board of directors there. And so that's, you know, kind of came in my journey and my pathway. And then teaching at the women's space kind of fell into place there too.
So I want to kind of go back and have you kind of maybe explain a little bit about, you used the word traumatic death, and so if you could, just for the people listening, what defines, what qualifies as a traumatic death, or what would be an example of what that would be versus a non-traumatic death, I guess.
Okay. The reason I called it traumatic death was for 2 reasons. One was the circumstances surrounding the death, be it the fire, and then the fact that they were children too. But traumatic deaths in the work that I do, and as I look at, are things like homicide, suicide, even car accidents can be traumatic. I think if we kind of look at it in general, almost any loss is traumatic to the person.
Right.
But certain circumstances would surround them to make them traumatic.
And specifically, right, if it happens to be a sudden, or if there's some level of violence or some level of you know, because it could be natural causes or natural disasters. Could be another traumatic death. So there's this element of you know, when someone is not that cancer isn't traumatic, but we see this process unfolding, and that would not necessarily qualify as traumatic death compared to like a drowning or, you know, like you said, some other type of accident.
Yeah, and I would almost categorize COVID-19 as tragic too, because of the fact that it's a virus that came upon us so quickly that did not have a vaccine or anything for it. And so, and the numbers of deaths have been increasing, you know, daily or weekly, and so there's tragedy that comes into a pandemic like this too. And
usually, and I learned this from you, is that with traumatic death then comes complicated grief.
Yes.
And maybe share a little bit about the term complicated grief.
Complicated grief is when can be multiple losses at one time, can be complicated. The circumstances, again, surrounding the loss as what we're experiencing now, too. And the thing that can make grief complicated, especially if we look at just COVID-19, which I experience with my own clients, is that when there's such significant loss occurring now, and we're seeing it unfold on the media daily, actually every hour you can watch it, and so what people are experiencing is then they're watching the suffering in the world happening, and these people experiencing losses in their family. So sometimes what that can do to make our grief complicated then is that it's bringing up past losses too. And it's almost like we're journeying through all the losses in our own life and the current loss that's going on, and the fear of what if this COVID-19 hits our close family. And we have to, you know, deal with that too. I guess there's also many other factors that can make grief complicated too. If let's say if I've lost my husband and I have different illnesses going on, or I'm dealing with cancer myself, that can make grief complicated too. So,
you know, you'd said something about how obviously with the kids dying, that was some complicated grieving, and also I clearly remember that time period. It was not that there's ever a formula that we use. We're always making it up as we're going along anyways. But as you had an opportunity to go out and study with Dr. Wolford, it sounds like they were bringing you through the journey of your own healing. Even though you were going there to learn, it was that piece of it. And when Don died, your dad died, it was almost the exact opposite of that. You took off a little bit of time off of work, but within a couple weeks of afterwards, you were back working, and as you said, it was complicated because you are now being the grief counselor to walk someone through their grief as you're very much walking through your own.
Correct.
And so I imagine that was an element of that could complicate it.
Yes.
Right. Even though, as we know, and all therapists that are walking this journey know, is that there is no doubt that we serve our clients, but we also, like with anybody, if you're walking with them, you also get things from your interactions with our clients. And sometimes it's a reminder, right, of something we already know, and we just need to be reminded of that. If you think back of that time period, what would be something that if there's anything that stands out to you that you indirectly got from one of your clients during that time of your own, that phase of your healing?
Probably hope. I think that the thing that's been so helpful for me is that, since I've known you for such a long time, and I kind of look to you as my sounding board. Throughout the years, I remember one time you said to me, and maybe you can refresh my memory about when it was, but it's been a while, when you told me to just kind of to step aside and allow myself to be that open vessel through whom God can work through. Then He will use you the best in your journey and wherever your journey takes you. I remember you telling me that. And the fact that I've learned from you too, just that whole self-care and self-exploration, self-discovery. And to do that, you have to take time to do that. And as you and I know, that's always been a challenge for me. And so, but you've always been present in my life, companioning me like I companion other people. And so when I was with my clients at the time after my dad passed away too, I just kind of reminded myself, you're their companion in this part of their life's journey. And that, just be still and listen. As you and I've talked to, I think there's an art to listening that as social workers and therapists in general, I think we're honing that every day too. But just to be open and listen to what they have to share. My clients have been my greatest teachers for me. I pretty much have learned to set myself aside, not to go with an agenda into each session, but just be and be with them. And they've taught me so much too. And I've seen a lot of people, if it's through my groups or individually, come in and tell me, I can't imagine my broken heart's ever going to heal. And I can't imagine my life without this person or these people. And then to look at them months later is remarkable, and we'll go back and I'll say, let's reflect on what journey you've been through. Did you ever think you'd be here? And they're like, no, I never thought it would get to this place. And they're continuing to grow and heal too. And I have a pleasure now of running, it's called Explore. It's a women's group of women that have been with me now for probably 3 years. Most are spouse loss. One is a son and a twin sister, and they just teach me so much, and they're there for each other and have that support. So I'd say hope. I really like to give a message of hope to everyone. It's an active process that we do, so we have to be mindful to find hope. And I think another thing my clients brought gave to me during that time too, and continue, is just gratefulness. Gratefulness to be a part of their life and them to be a part of mine for whatever time that may be.
Right. I think, and I do think it's an ongoing aspect, right? So that, we've talked about this numerous times, is that, there are times when that sadness wells up in me as I think about Don, and there are more days when that I'm not sad about, and it's not that I'm glad that he's passing, but I don't have that overwhelming sadness that was like daily initially. Now, when it comes pretty intensely still, but I do know that it's going to kind of go down, right? It goes from a boiling back down to a simmer, and there's certain things that'll trigger it, more so than others. And I imagine you've had some of the similar types, and we've talked about, especially if we're up at the lake or wherever it may be. I want to go back and touch on something you said earlier. And these are not your words; these are my words. So feel free to disagree or point something out. But it was, and I heard this concept, and that's why it caught my attention when I was listening to a podcast recently, that you went through when you were having breakfast with Linda. You went through a period where God was dead to you.
Yes.
Or maybe more importantly, there was a deconstruction of God as you knew him up to that point. And I don't mean God is dead, but the concept of God as you understood him to be. Tell us a little bit about what was that like, and what was some of the driving points with that?
Well, I think that and I know many people struggle with this too, is when you're brought up in a home that's faith-based, and prayer has always been a big part of that. And I think when that tragedy struck, it kind of caught... I guess my faith wasn't as strong as I thought it was, to be honest with you. And I think it took Linda saying something to me, and then watching her own faith journey to now really dive into my relationship with God, or with Christ, that's what was important, was my relationship with him, not... and I don't think I had that, even though I grew up in a faith-based home. I don't think I had that personal relationship as deep as I thought I did. And now I was, challenging it, and I didn't know if I should challenge it. And so I kind of started my own self-discovery of who I was as a faith-based individual, what my values and morals were. And I'm on that journey still, and I'll always be on that journey until the day I'm no longer here either. And the one thing that I've learned through all this journey too is to always just rely on him and invite him into my day and my life. And
you said something, and I was listening to some stuff, and I've talked about this before, and Dalton and I were just recently talking about this again, was that I think one of the things that happens when we lose, when a loved one dies, or someone close to us dies, or we have something that's going on right now, is that we may have been able to, I'll speak for myself. I know that I had a concept in my mind that God, the church, which was the vehicle of learning about God, was a transactional God. It was like Santa Claus, right? So if I did certain things, right, then I'd be on the good list, and then I'd get things that little boys get on the good list, right? And then if I don't do those things, so if I don't do something or do these other things, then I'll be on the bad list, coal and all the things that go along with that. Or I guess that would also be considered hell, right? That there was this arrangement that I could control the outcome if I just did certain things. And then something happens, right, that's bigger than that. The death of the kids, the death of Don, is bigger than that transactional model. Or if I keep the model, then it's, why did God do this? Why were we not spared from this? You've run the homicide support group, and they thought that they were not going to be that family because they did all the right things on the good list. And homicide still happened to their son, to their loved one, or to their daughter. So I think what I heard you say is that what you learned through going out to Colorado with Dr. Wolford and going through that process, that God was a transformational God, that the God that you've now experience is more transformational than transactional. That doesn't mean we don't slip back into it, right? Especially in good times, right?
Yeah, when things are running smoothly.
Yeah. Or even default to it to try to change the circumstance in the initial stages of change. I want to go back to that transactional because then I think I can control it.
Yeah.
So I threw a bunch of stuff out there, but what are your thoughts about?
Well, one thing I think that I've learned to accept too is that if anyone can shoulder me being angry at them, it's God. And I try to share that with my clients, that those that have that faith basis, that it's okay to be angry. It's natural to be angry. It's natural to ask the whys, and question. That's part of our human nature. And then the thing is just to continue searching whatever emotions we're experiencing. It's sitting with them and being with those emotions in grief and identifying them if we can, and allowing ourselves to feel them. And that's how we transform. I mean, if we were to push everything down inside us and never talk about our losses, how would we transform? Because we're covering them up with whatever else we're being busy with, too. And so you have to take that time to be still and allow yourself to feel, and be mindful of what's happening. I always tell people it's a balance. I need time to be with me, and I need time to be with others. Yeah. Because it's being with me is where transformation is going to be present, and being with others is where transformation is going to be present. So it's a balance of both, or a combination of both.
And speaking of right now, right, with everything going on with the COVID-19, that busyness that we normally will do, right, our normal routine of busyness is getting totally upside down, totally disrupted. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't be busy around our house, right? We can still distract ourselves, but our normal just going to the store just to go shopping, those stores are closed. Or I'll just go out to eat, or I'll just run over to a friend's house or whatever. Those things are now taken, and in that the normal medication or anesthetizer of busyness is being disrupted. And so a bunch of feelings may be coming up, right? And let alone, like you said, people watching the TV, and then that's, just bringing up more and more fear, or in my case, there's been an element of anxiousness with it, and the uncertainty aspect, but then there's this sadness and the heaviness of the sadness that's been going on. So tell us a little bit about right now. I mean, I know here at the office, right, we're fortunate that we can still do our work digitally. I mean, some of us are still coming physically to the office and working out of our offices there, but the majority of the therapists are working from their homes for a handful of different reasons why that is. But we're still able to do it through the digital counseling, still be able to be there, which for me is totally different, right? I pick up on energy from people. And I'm getting better at it, being able to do the same thing now, either on the phone or through being more open to it. But it's different. But how is this time period complicating the grieving process unlike any other time that I've ever been aware of? So if someone, a loved one passes now, a significant other passes now, how is this time period causing a complicated grief?
Well, the problem is now that they can't have funerals. They can have like a family gathering, because it has to be 10 people. So what's happening is it's really, I think, to some degree, is delaying the grief process, because the purpose of a funeral, visitation, memorial service, celebration of life, whatever we call it, is acknowledging the loss or death of that person. And really, those gatherings are opening the doors for the grief process to begin, because what we're actually doing is saying goodbye to the physical body. And allowing ourselves then to open ourselves up to this grieving process, of which now this person is one of memory. Again, we can't control COVID-19. The funeral homes can't control, what they're required to do by the state. But the one thing I hope that people will realize that they have the opportunity to do is, one, to spend time with the person who passed away, to spend time with the body, if it's in a group of, 10 or less, to take that time and spend that time with the person. The beauty, I guess, if I was to say beauty and tragedy, is our technology, because we can still, some places, maybe some funeral homes more than others, can do things via video now, or digital, as we're experiencing in counseling. But also, let's say you and I have a family loss during this time, but you and I could connect via, we could FaceTime, Zoom, whatever other programs are out there, and we could still honor our loved one. We could light a candle together. We could share a memory together. We could pick out, verses that might mean something, play music. So we can still honor our loved one, even though we can't gather in a funeral or celebration of life service. And the fact that, again, that creates us to mourn, right? It's allowing us to mourn presently, so we're not postponing the mourning process. Plus, then later, we can gather as a larger community to honor that loved one too. The thing I like about Fitzgerald's Funeral Home too is they have where you can post online condolences. So families, if we as a community would do that for families that we know that have had loved ones that have passed away, then they're reading those condolences and they're seeing the ways in which others are honoring the loss of their loved one too. Same as texting someone or emailing them. We have so much at our hands that we can provide support to these families, even though, they can't have the larger funeral. As I always, when I'm talking to, as I continue to talk to families too, or individuals, I do remind them, though, that at this time with a pandemic and a personal loss, all your emotions are going to be heightened. And they're going to feel very strong, very intense. One of the natural expressions I think of a lot is agony. You know how you can have that agony inside of you, that pain that's so painful? You and I probably couldn't even describe it to each other, even though we know each other well. I can't put words to that.
Like a deep aching.
Yeah. And as you were talking earlier, about your feelings lessening too, I use that word soften, because I'm trying to think of something someone could visualize, like I think of a soft blanket or something. Those emotions will eventually start to soften as we journey through our grief too. So hopefully for them to remember that at this time too, what you're feeling, the intensity now, isn't always going to be present. That it does start to soften as we intentionally take our journey through grief and mourning. But it's been I think it's a challenge for the funeral homes.
Yeah.
You know, the directors I work with who are so compassionate and I feel have done such a good job walking alongside families at a time that is so difficult to do when you're limited. You know, when other people are limiting you. Do you see, again, out of our control, right? To do, but...
Well, and I think that is... I'm glad you were giving some suggestions, because I think it's easy, in the midst of grief anyways, it's easy to be angry about something that I can't control, right? And so it's easy to just recognize that I'm mad because something else got taken from me. I can't even, you know, and in this, so not only has my loved one died, but now I can't even do what I normally, or what we even plan to do, or whatever may be going on. And so I think this idea that anger may be the emotion that we're feeling, but what's possibly underneath the anger, maybe that sadness, maybe that a fear, you know, maybe there's other things that are going, and anger is just, you know, on the surface, and I can stay there, I can hang on to that, and I can be angry at, I don't know, anger at the government, anger at anger at the funeral home itself. Maybe it's another one of those transactional things. Why did this happen to me at this time? Why did this happen to my loved one at this time? And recognizing it just happened to be this time.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, anger is a very challenging emotion if you think about it too. Because normally if I get angry and I'm not finding a way to release that, if it's writing about it, talking about it, who do you think's going to get the blunt of my anger?
Sure.
Probably those that I love or I'm with the most. Or like you said just earlier too, Kevin, you know, you maybe become mad at the funeral director or the funeral home, which they can't control this either, you know. And so I think it's really important to challenge ourselves to spend time with our emotions as we're going through this COVID-19. If we're dealing with loss, physical loss, and not able to have a funeral. It's been interesting. I had someone say to me the other day, "You seem so calm through this." And I said, well, I'm really not an anxious person to begin with, or worry, but I want to go back to hope that we mentioned earlier when we were talking, because I think hope is an active process that we go through. And that's what I have to live with, hope that we will get through this, hope that we're becoming stronger, right? We're becoming stronger as KP Counseling. We're becoming stronger in our families, in our community, in our world. I hope that's what's happening with us. I hope that we're all taking the time to discover who we really are as people. That's the beauty to me, is it's slowed me down enough now to really spend time and think about, you know, how I can grow as a person, and then how do I provide hope to other people? If it's through a text, an email, dropping a plant off at a door, smiling at somebody, buying the guy behind me a cup of coffee, you know, play it forward, is that what they always called it before? So hope, to me, is what sustains me. And I have to remember that, and I have to find ways that I can provide hope for other people, because I think that's what gives us calmness, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
You know, it's our hope.
Well, I think the hope is recognizing, you know, I wrote something yesterday, and earlier I was talking about it, is this idea that with every winter, right, no matter how harsh it is, we know that there is, at some point, there's going to be a spring. Now, it may not be, you know, exactly what I picture it to be, but I know it isn't the same harshness of the depths of the winter, right? And maybe it'll be more than I've ever expected. Maybe it won't be what I expected. But I do know that it's going to shift and it's going to change. And then it's going to change and go back to the seasons of the summer, and then the fall, and then we'll be back in winter again. And not that saying one is good and one is bad, that they're all part of it. And I think that is, you know, like when we see those aspects of if the kids wouldn't have died, and if they wouldn't have died the way they died, would you have ever gone out and sought to be a grief counselor?
No.
And how many people have you been able to help and companion through? Now, again, if we have a transactional model that we work with, then they had to die so that you could do this? Or as a result of them dying, and what you did with that is you transformed into maybe what your calling was all along. Right? And so I think it's hard for me to get my head wrapped around, that transformation is literally a different way of looking at things. It's a different perspective, a different perception of looking at things. And I think that is also the opportunity that we have with all this going on. I know that, there is going to be more suffering and more tragedy before the spring comes with this, but I believe it'll come. And I think that hope, remembering that, and remembering that our role right now, we're asked to walk people through this, walk with them. And it's literally, as we've talked all the time, we're literally walking it, learning how to do digital counseling, like in hours, right? We had no training to do this, right? No. and just figuring it out as we go along, right? And knowing that we're going to get better at it as time goes on. How do we get messages out to people to give them hope? But it starts with us doing our own journey first.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that one thing I've learned I call it life review. So, I've been very aware of how blessed I've been to be doing the work I do. And so I've taken that time to do a life review. So I've literally gone back to when the kids passed away. If you kind of view a timeline, I guess that's kind of how you could visualize it. And literally put down everything that's happened in my journey so far. It's the thread. It's amazing to see how the thread is woven into the tapestry of my life to be where I'm at today. And I still do get amazed when other doors open. I don't know why, because I shouldn't, right? But I always am. And hopefully I can just continue to do the work that I'm so passionate about doing until I no longer can do it. But the transformation's been remarkable. And if I was a really good writer, I'd write a book. It would be awesome. But maybe that will be the next step.
Maybe that'll be the next opportunity.
Yeah. But life review, I encourage anyone to do that, especially this time too, during the pandemic, because I think the pandemic and loss and grief overshadow sometimes the beauty of our own life. And if we take time to go back and look, we could really probably see how grateful we are for the life that we've lived.
I agree, and having insight of your journey because we spend so much time together. I know that is a big part of what you're not just talking it, but you do it. So, Delinda, as we're wrapping up for today, what would be one thing that you would want the listeners to know? What would be, if there's one thing that you would want to share with them or have them end this conversation with?
I would hope that, there you go, hope. I hope that they have hope. I hope that they take this time to, I always say, love on the people you love them, you love. Spend some time in reflection to see just how is this changing you as a person? How are you being transformed through this? What are you grateful for through this journey? What new life will it stem in you? All right. And to be the light in the darkness, because I think that's what we are, Kevin. No matter who we are and what jobs we have, we're the light in people's darkness. And I think we've seen that through this pandemic by the way people are touching the lives of others. So I love your thing. I always try to think of a flame or a light at all times. And so hopefully then we all can be effective during this.
All right. Well, thank you, Delinda. Thank you for being here, and thanks for just jumping on as we had a conversation yesterday. So
you're welcome.
So thank you very much for being with us today. And as Delinda has talked about, that the tragedy that impacted her family and impacted her life, it had then sprung the opportunity to change. It forced then the change of the model of how she saw God from a transactional to a transformational, and then through that transformation, it became a completely different relationship. I think the idea of in time, purpose will reveal itself in that pain, and that no matter how dark it may be for you right now, know that we have to go through this period, but there will be an opportunity for transformation to come. Looking forward to be with you again next week.